Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Monday, November 20th. I'm your host, Jon Jeune. And it is a solo pod today. Greg, had some other commitments that he had to attend to, so couldn't be with us today. So no worries. I got this covered. I got you covered. Most definitely, if you are, listening to this on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, definitely appreciate you. Just ask that if you could, stop right there and leave a rating and review. Definitely goes a long way to help the show out. If you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or formerly Twitter, known as X currently, or you're watching on Twitch, just make sure you go ahead and, leave a comment, like the video, subscribe if you're not already. Man, but we are here to recap Week 11. What a week it was. Interesting games that took place. We still have, what many believe to be, what definitely is a Super Bowl rematch, but what many believe to be potentially a Super Bowl preview here between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Kansas City Chiefs, ready to kick off tonight. So that'll obviously be an interesting matchup. We still got some high flying fantasy football players that are part of those matchups. So some of your fantasy matchups might depend on that game right there. So definitely going to be curious to see how, it plays out. Some of my matchups are dependent on that on tonight's game as well. So if you are here, if you're watching live, appreciate you. Sorry for being a little bit late today. Go ahead and get in the chat. Go ahead, comment, ask some questions. Just tell us how we're doing today. Or tell me how we're doing today on this Week 11 recap this Monday here. So we're going to start with the quarterback position like we always do. And the number one quarterback on the week, that is Trevor Lawrence. I mean, let's get to the stat line here with Trevor Lawrence. 24 of 32, 262 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, added 17 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. Good for 32.2 fantasy points on the day. And just when Greg and I were getting ready to, basically close the book there on Trevor Lawrence, he comes out with by far his best performance of the year and a number one quarterback of the week type week here. And it's not like we believe Trevor Lawrence was incapable of these types of performances. He just hadn't been given them to you. If you've been starting him every week, he's basically killed you. And in classic fantasy football fashion, when we start recommending you not to play Trevor Lawrence, and you probably took our advice and went ahead and didn't play him, he comes out as the number one quarterback on the week. So, things like this will happen. I process over results always, but this is definitely one to keep an eye out, going forward, especially because I think we might have recommended him as a drop candidate. So, curious to see how this happens, if this happens in coming weeks as well. Moving on to the number 2 quarterback on the week, and this is we got to hit the button for this one. That's right, Brock Purdy, Glock Purdy, Brock Sturdy, whatever you want to call him. But he's pretty good. Whatever you do call him. 21 to 25, 333 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, a perfect passer rating of 158.3, adding 14 rushing yards on the ground, 26.7 fantasy points from Brock Purdy, my quarterback start of the week. Tampa Bay has been a great matchup for quarterbacks, for opposing quarterbacks, opposing pass offenses, and Brock Purdy just ended up in a great spot. But as I mentioned on Thursday, when I was making him my start of the week, he's been a really good quarterback all year. not just in real life, but in obviously fantasy football as well. So it's one of those situations where he's got the best ecosystem, I think, of any starting quarterback in football right now. When you look up and down, the offensive skill group here, and even the offensive line and play calling situation here for Brock Purdy is really good, and he's got a really really good um, upcoming schedule as well. I mean, he's got a matchup against Seattle on Thanksgiving. Then he has to face Philadelphia, then Seattle again, Arizona. He does get Baltimore in the what would be the semifinals of the fantasy playoffs. So maybe you want to get a different option there. But then he's got to go to Washington and face that terrible defense in Week 17 championship week. So definitely would like to get some Brock Purdy in my lineups if I can, or on my rosters. Have him in a few, and which is why I was privy to this spot as well for Brock Purdy. But yeah, man, it's just great performance by him, and I think one that we'll continue to see throughout the rest of the season. Moving on to the QB3 on the day, that would be Justin Herbert, 21 of 36, 260 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 3 rushing yards on 8 rush attempts there, 25.7 fantasy points on the day. Love this from the Herb, man, and it could have been an even bigger day. Keenan Allen had a touchdown pass that just hit him right in the chest, just dropped it. Quentin Johnston had what would have been a game-winning touchdown pass down the end of down the right sideline, which would have ended the game there for the Chargers and got them a win. And I'm salty because I picked the Chargers for my survivor. So as I'm watching all this happen, I'm just dying inside. But anyway, love this performance from Herbert. Love the 73 rushing yards from Herbert as well. That feels like it's got to be a career high. I mean, this is obviously something that I think a lot of people thought he was capable of, but we just hadn't really seen it at the NFL level. He does run a little bit, and specifically, especially when they get down near the goal line or for first downs. But he was ripping off some big scrambles. I think he even had a hurdle in this game too. I mean, Herbert was definitely on one, and personally, I would love to see him run some more. Just because it would add to not just another element with his Chargers offense, but obviously what it could do for his fantasy value. So yeah, if he can keep that up, that would be fantastic. Kind of reminds me of like Josh Allen a little bit in terms of his size and his physical presence there. Maybe not as like thick as Josh Allen, but definitely a guy that could be a weapon with his legs when he gets out in the open field. And rounding out these top 12 quarterbacks, man, the quarterback 4 in the week, Lamar Jackson, 5, Tommy DeVito, 6, Josh Allen, 7, Greg start of the week, Kyler Murray, 8, Justin Fields, 9, my stream of the week, and Jordan Love, 10, Sam Howell, 11, Tua Tagovailoa, and 12, Joshua Dobbs. Obviously, I'm going to start with Lamar Jackson. I had talked about this performance, talked about him getting a bounce back against the Baltimore or against the Cincinnati Bengals with the Baltimore Ravens. Did not help that he lost Mark Andrews basically, on the first drive of this game here. First offensive drive, I think it was for Baltimore. Did not help there, but he definitely was. It was a Lamar performance that all of us had been used to seeing in multiple years. Obviously with Lamar and what he was giving us early in the season as well. So great to see him come back with this bounce back performance. Kyler Murray. Love that he's continuing to use his legs. Second straight week, he's run for a touchdown here. So obviously love that he's comfortable running around using his legs, and that's going to be great for fantasy, especially with the the schedule coming up for Kyler Murray, man. I mean, you've got to love, if you are the Kyler Murray manager, you've been waiting for him. you're looking at this upcoming schedule against the Rams and Pittsburgh, which, those are like two okay matchups in which obviously you're willing to go into, a lot of matchups with Kyler Murray as your quarterback simply because of, his legs. But then he's got the bye in week 14, which I think is probably the only downside to Kyler Murray's schedule, is that the bye is in a week where week 14, if you're in, if there's a lot of parity in your leagues, you probably need to win that week to get in. And so having Kyler Murray would definitely make it more plausible that you get in. But a lot of teams, he could be your second quarterback, right? Because some teams had to make it this far without Kyler Murray. So I think that, if you have a CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray combination, you might feel pretty good about that. So, definitely something to keep in mind. But then he's got Chicago in week 16, and he's got Philadelphia week 17. And that Philadelphia matchup is like a really good one. You're hoping that Dallas keeps winning in this instance because, then it makes Philadelphia really, have to play that game and play to win that game there. So if Kyler Murray can, show out there that week in week 17 against Philadelphia, bad Philadelphia defense, or Philadelphia defense that's been weak against the pass, I should say, and his Arizona defense continues to be bad, like they have been. And Jalen Hurts, you kind of get this whole back and forth nature of this game here going. So definitely something that you would like to see in week 17. But Justin Fields, good to see him in his first start back. Finishes the quarterback 8. Sam Howell, even in a game where it doesn't particularly look good for him, I like the fact that he uses his legs, gets in the end zone as well. And then Josh Dobbs, man, again in a tough matchup. We've talked about this Denver defense getting better. He continues to get it done. Runs for a touchdown again. So definitely love to see that. And how can I forget, man? Tommy DeVito, proud of Don Bosco, quarterback 5 finish. Shout out to him. 3 touchdowns, no interception game. It's a cool story, man. Cool story for the kid out of hometown kid out of New Jersey playing for the hometown Giants there. So that's pretty cool stuff. But moving on to the quarterback Jags. And I got a few here. I mean, we're not going to talk about the Dak Prescotts and the CJ Strouds. Like they don't really deserve to be in that segment. Obviously CJ Stroud had another big statistical game. Did have probably his worst game of the season interception wise, but could have obviously finished with a much better day, save for those interceptions. But we will talk about Jared Goff, who also had a 3 interception day on his side, but it looked like really bad there for Jared Goff up until, I don't know, the last, I think there was 7 minutes left in the game. They scored, they were down 12 with 7 minutes left or something like that, and end up coming back to beat the Chicago Bears. That was a wild game, wild sequence of events. But Jared Goff got it done in real world, but in fantasy, probably tanked. Was close to tanking your day there. Geno Smith, he suffered an injury. So obviously we're not going to kill him for that. But just all in all, wasn't a great day. That game was kind of ugly from the start. Matthew Stafford also part of that game, so he was part of the reason why it was ugly as well. Is the Rams couldn't had trouble scoring in this one too. Baker Mayfield, we had talked about him as being a potential stream candidate in this matchup against the Niners. We weren't really sure, like, okay, are the Niners, like, is this Niners defense really legit now? Because of what they did to Trevor Lawrence. So, that was one of the things we wanted to watch. But now I guess we got our answer, right? Like, don't go after that Niners defense anymore. Yeah, we were able to get them at the beginning of the year, but these last couple of weeks, they've really started to shut down some of these opposing quarterbacks. And that's it on the quarterbacks. We'll move on to the running back position here, starting with our number 1 running back of the week, and that was Saquon Barkley, 14 carries, 83 rushing yards. No rushing touchdowns, but did add 4 receptions on 5 targets for 57 receiving yards and 2 touchdown receptions, 30 PPR points on the day there for Saquon. Fantastic day by him. Fantastic day for him. It's just kind of a reminder of the talent that he is, that even in this bad situation, this bad offense, that he can still, be fantasy productive. Be productive in fantasy. That was kind of a weird way to say it, but be productive in fantasy and still provide the ceiling that we all know he's capable of. In redraft leagues, he's a tough person to want to buy because the situation is so bad that you're afraid that these weeks might come. But isn't that if you can pay an RB2 price tag for Saquon, that's something that I think is worthwhile because you're getting volume, and B, this upside that he's capable of getting. So definitely like Saquon rest of season. But again, it's not something I would it's not particularly a move I would go really hard after to make happen, and try to overpay to get him on my roster, just because the situation is so tough to trust there. But moving on to the number 2 running back on the week, Jaylen Warren, 9 carries, 129 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, added 3 targets on 3 receptions for 16 receiving yards, 23.5 PPR points on the day. It's funny, I was watching the broadcast of this game. I think it was on Red Zone, and I forget who it was. I think it might have been, was it Charles Davis? Could have been, maybe it was somebody else, but they were talking about Jaylen Warren and how they had compared him to Austin Eckler. It's that's really funny because we had the same conversation on the podcast just a few days before. So I'm glad I'm not the only person seeing it. But Jaylen Warren, he's absolutely been balling this year. I said it back on Sirius XM a few weeks ago. I think Bob Harris and Mike Dempsey asked me if I would rather have Najee Harris or Jaylen Warren rest of the season. And I said Najee Harris. And I left that, it was the Steelers Titans were playing that night on Thursday Night Football. And I watched that game and I was like, man, I really wish I could go change my answer because Jaylen Warren looks like a million times better than Najee Harris. Maybe a million times better is hyperbolic there, but Jaylen Warren looks definitely more explosive. Obviously, Najee Harris is still good at football. He just cannot break these big runs off, these electric runs off that Jaylen Warren is capable of. So something to keep in mind from a dynasty perspective here. Jaylen Warren is a guy that I'm really into, especially, and I brought up the parallels of him and Austin Eckler. They're both undrafted free agents. They're both here essentially. They came here essentially as a backup to a running back with first-round pedigree, Najee Harris, for Pittsburgh, and Melvin Gordon for the Chargers. And they've not only eaten into that work, but they started the discussion hey, is it possible that this guy might be better than the guy we drafted in the first round? So Jaylen Warren is a super interesting guy. And obviously we know what Melvin Gordon's career has become. And we see what Austin Eckler's has become as well. So definitely, something to keep in mind as these guys' careers progress forward, because people are going to throw out the draft capital thing for running backs. Jaylen Warren is undrafted free agent. They're going to bring up team names like James Robinson, and obviously, the probability is in the favor that, hey, it might not last. But there's also, you get to a point where a guy has been so productive at this level that his draft status doesn't even matter anymore, right? Or his lack of production at this level is to the point where his draft capital doesn't matter anymore, in the reverse effect with first round picks. So Jaylen Warren, I think he's here to stay. Dude's a baller. So he's a guy that I would not be afraid to go out and see what it could acquire to get a Jaylen Warren on my football team, my dynasty team. Moving on to the RB3 on the week, and that's Jahmyr Gibbs. 8 carries, 36 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown. Also added 6 targets, 6 receptions for 59 receiving yards, 21.5 PPR points on the day. I will be honest, I thought we would see more usage out of Jahmyr Gibbs with the score the way that it was. I just remember it being early, and the Chicago Bears had basically They had like a 2-score lead, almost 3-score lead here on the Detroit Lions, and I thought, hey, this is perfect as a Jahmyr Gibbs manager. Like, this means more Gibbs, more fantasy points, more targets, and 6 targets still, it's decent. It's pretty good. Just thought that we'd see a lot more usage out of him. But what can I really argue? We got 21 and a half PPR points on the day, so maybe I'm being a little greedy there. But if you stuck with Jahmyr Gibbs, I'm happy for you. Obviously, I stuck with him. Maybe you could have called me biased because he was my breakout running back, but we do this all the time with rookies, right? Like, we come out the gate, like at the beginning of the year, you were able to get them for so cheap in May, June, July in underdog drafts and maybe mock drafts and things like that. But then once news reports start happening, preseason games start getting played, but you get to a point where the draft investment becomes very expensive, and it gets to a point where people, right out the gate, we're expecting these top performances, right? But we also have to remember that there's this like natural progression that a rookie has to take in the NFL sometimes, especially at the running back position, where you're asked to do a lot of different things. And, you're asked to not only know your responsibilities in the run game, but, what about in pass protection? What are you doing as part of the pass game, right? Like knowing when to release out on a route, when you have to stay in and, provide extra protection for the quarterback. So there's all these different nuances to playing the position that, us just sitting here saying like, hey, that player's good. Like, they're really good. Look what they do when they have the ball in their hands. Like, it's so much, there's so much more that goes into that. And so then we get, as a community, tend to get really frustrated very early when the production's not there. But then we also have to kind of remember, like, he's playing in the NFL for the first time, right? Like, there's a progression that has to take place. And we always say the cream rises to the top, and at some point, talent wins out. And that's kind of what's happening here with Jahmyr Gibbs, Dave Montgomery. Dave Montgomery still has a role. He's still involved. But it gets to a point where the Detroit Lions are like, well, we can't not have him on the field anymore, right? Like, we were able to do that before, but now he is so good. He's becoming so comfortable that we have to find ways to get him opportunities. And that's exactly what's happening. So just keep that in mind next year and in future years. Because like I said, at the beginning of the year, I had Gibbs and Montgomery both inside my top 20 of running backs. They're both going to finish inside the top 20 of running backs. And how it happens, we'll know the story. Maybe we won't remember it, but, we've seen now 30-point weeks from Montgomery, and we've seen 30-point weeks from Jahmyr Gibbs. We've seen, 10-point weeks from Jahmyr Gibbs. We've seen, I don't know if we've seen a 10-point week from Montgomery outside of him not being healthy, but I think we had 12 and a half last week, potentially in PPR. But either way, we've seen some of these low weeks from Montgomery. So it's going to happen, man. Rounding out these running back swags, Christian McCaffrey coming in as the running back 4. Gus Edwards coming in at 5, tying with Joe Mixon for the running back 5. We had Brian Robinson coming at 7, Devin Singletary coming at 8, James Cook coming at 9, Breece Hall 10, Tony Pollard 11, David Montgomery tying with Rachaad White for the running back 12. The things that stuck out to me, Brian Robinson with another big reception week. Obviously there was no Antonio Gibson in this game. So we've always talked about like, oh, we want Antonio Gibson because we know that if Brian Robinson goes down, Gibson already has the role of being the pass catcher, and but then he'll get the 2-down role as well. But like what I'm seeing, what I've learned this year is that if Antonio Gibson is out, Brian Robinson becomes like a workhorse, because this is now 2 weeks in a row where Gibson was either limited or out, and Brian Robinson is taking on a role of 9 targets, 7 receptions, 58 receiving yards. Like, this is really good usage here out of Brian Robinson, to, again, the 9 targets to go along with the 17 rush attempts. That's 26 opportunities that we're talking about for the Washington Commanders running back. And I like that usage, right? So Brian Robinson, he's been one of the steals of fantasy this year, just in terms of like what the price you had to pay to get him and what he's providing from you. I mean, he's going to finish as a top 12 running back. No running back has as many RB1 finishes this season as Brian Robinson does. I believe he's the only running back to have multiple RB1 finishes on the season. So Brian Robinson, I think, is here to stay, at least for the remainder of 2023. James Cook, we saw really good usage out of him in his first game under new offensive coordinator Joe Brady. 21 total opportunities. We saw a touchdown, and that touchdown came in the red zone, and it came via the pass. Like those more because you get the points for the reception. So I really like the fact that Joe Brady was willing to use James Cook in this, in this capacity here. So definitely love to see that. Tony Pollard, love the fact that he was able to show up in a good matchup. Finally got in the end zone here, which is fantastic to finally see here for him. Ty Chandler, I thought had another great game. Obviously had the long run there on the fake punt, but he just looks so explosive in this game. 73 rushing yards on 10 carries, added 4 receptions on 4 targets for 37 yards, 15 PPR points. So I think rest of the season, he's a guy that has to be on your roster, has to be, a guy that you are looking to find a way to get in your lineup as a flex option because, I think this is legit here. And then Zach Charbonnet, also got some pretty heavy usage there, 15 rush attempts, also added 6 receptions on 6 targets because Kenneth Walker had suffered an injury there to his oblique. So seems like Zach Charbonnet could probably get this, will probably get this backfield to himself for some period of time. And then how could I forget Devin Singletary, man, just showing out, continuing to show out, 22 rushing yards on 112 rushing yards on 22 attempts for and a rushing touchdown there, filling in for Dameon Pierce, who, again, I don't know if he gets his job back when he gets back here. So, but again, like I said, pick up Dameon Pierce because you honestly never know what could happen here. Moving on to the running back Jags, and quite a few, man. My running back start of the week in Derrick Henry. Greg's running back start of the week in James Conner. Austin Eckler did not have a great day there running against a Green Bay defense, which thought that he could get off on a little bit. Najee Harris, we see Jaylen Warren coming in RB2 on the week. Najee Harris not nowhere near that. So obviously it was against a Cleveland rush defense that we knew was going to be tough. Najee Harris, or Jaylen Warren rather, a lot of his production came on that 74-yard touchdown run, but he still had to make that run happen, right? And Najee Harris, I don't think, is capable of doing that at this point in time, right? So, and Keaton Mitchell, man, what a face plant it was there. Have him as, I had him as an RB3 flex option. And if you started him, it just did not go well there. Only 5.1 PPR points on the day. So definitely disappointing there. Moving on to the wide receiver swags, the number one wide receiver on the week. And this one made a lot of people punch air, I'm sure. Calvin Ridley, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 103 receiving yards, 2 touchdown receptions, easily his best game of the year. Also added 18 rushing yards, 31.1 PPR points on the day, like by far his best game of the year. Somebody had tweeted out something of his stat differentials with Zay Jones, without Zay Jones. I don't know how much weight that really holds. I mean, Zay Jones played in week 1, did not play again. Obviously, Calvin really had a big game in week 1. Was out with the knee injury and, returned on Sunday. And then Calvin really has another big game. So I don't know. Like, I would need to see a larger sample size there before I could really state that data as truly empirical. But for me, I'm just happy to see this performance here by Calvin Ridley. It's something that I think, I know Greg had been waiting on. Something I had been waiting on, thinking it was going to come for a few weeks now. So just curious to see if it's something that continues, going forward. So something to definitely note. Moving on to the wide receiver 2 on the week, Tyreek Hill, 11 targets, 10 receptions, 146 receiving yards, and a touchdown, 30.6 PPR points on the day. Tyreek Hill, absolutely just, amazing on the football field. I mean, it did scare us a little bit, left the game with a hand injury, did come back. So something that one of those things where you really thought that, hey, he might be done because he was headed to the locker room and they had a towel over his hand. And I was like, oh, man. But he came back and he was fine. So, look to Tyreek Hill to continue what he's doing. Does get the Jets next week. Do look like they're in a bad spot. So maybe it's not the spot that we, maybe thought it might have been coming into week 12 here. But definitely no way you could take Tyreek Hill out of your lineup. Moving on to the wide receiver 3 on the day, my guy, man, Tank Dell, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 149 receiving yards, and a touchdown there. 28.9 PPR points on the day. Tank Dell he's doing some amazing stuff there. I think the guy is like 5'8", 5'9", like 165, 170 pounds. And none of that matters, man. Like he gets open like a lot of people can't get open at this level. Just absolutely balling. And I like wasn't all over Tank Dell in Dynasty. Like I'm not even going to pretend to say that I have a ton of Tank Dell in Dynasty, but the moment that these opportunities opened up for him in week 1, or in week 2, I was all over it. I do know the story about CJ Stroud having asked the Texans specifically to draft Tank Dell. So we've been on it very early. He was one of my favorite waiver wire additions early in the season, and it's kind of just he's one of my favorite players to watch. I mean, naturally, because CJ Stroud is one of my favorite players to watch as well. So definitely love what is going on here with Tank Dell. Just continue to play him, man. I mean, CJ Stroud, Tank Dell is going to lead people to championships for sure. It definitely will. Moving on to the remaining wide receiver swags. The wide receiver 4 in the week, Keenan Allen. The wide receiver 5, Greg start of the week, Brandon Ayuk. The wide receiver 6, DJ Moore. 7, Amon-Ra St. Brown. 8, Devontae Adams. 9, Khalil Shakir. 10, DK Metcalf. 11, Jaden Reed. And wide receiver 12, Puka Nacua. So this was interesting. Obviously, Brandon Ayuk had the big day. Greg start of the week. Love to see that day there by Brandon Ayuk. Keenan Allen, man, with a whopping 16 targets. Did have 2 drops, man. It was really not it was not the typical Keenan Allen day here. I mean, you look at the fantasy production, you're very happy, but he could have had a much bigger day. Dropped what would have been like a third down conversion for the Chargers early in the game. Dropped what would have been a touchdown later in the game there. So, could have been a much bigger fantasy day here for Keenan Allen. DJ Moore, glad to see him, having his moments here again with a healthy Justin Fields. I had mentioned him as being somebody, and one of our listeners was asking, if they can get an upgrade at wide receiver. One of the names I threw out was DJ Moore because you're kind of buying him for what he's been, not what he can be, assuming Justin Fields stays healthy rest of the season. So definitely like that. Jaden Reed, we've been talking about him for a few weeks now as being the Packers wide receiver two roster and 2 play. Even got involved in the running game this week, 46 rushing yards there and a touchdown. So definitely love the usage there for the rookie. And then Puka Nacua, did have a big game, caught his, I believe it was 3rd touchdown of the season, might have been his 2nd or his 3rd touchdown of the year. But Cooper Kupp had to leave the game with an ankle injury. So there's a possibility that we see Puka Nacua, being, going back to what he was before Cooper Kupp, right? Came back healthy, which was, basically seeing the bulk of the work here for the LA Rams, where we're getting 12, 15, 16 target game. I think we had a 20 target game here for Puka Nacua as well, man. So definitely would love to see that continue there for Puka. And then, some honorable mentions. Darius Slayton had a big game for the New York Giants, but then had to quickly leave with an arm injury. Cortland Sutton just continuing his resurgence here with Russell Wilson in their second year together. Odell Beckham had a big game before having to leave with an injury on Thursday night. Elijah Moore had a halfway decent game as well. 6 receptions for 60 yards playing with DTR. So something to keep in mind. I mean, obviously the Pittsburgh Steelers struggle against inside receivers, those slot receivers. So that could have been a, case of the matchup, but something to note, with the new quarterback in there as well too. Moving on to these wide receiver Jags. And Garrett Wilson, man, just not a great day. And it did not feel like it was going to be a good day for quite some time there with Garrett Wilson and the Jets offense. I mean, very early on, the Bills made it clear that they were not going to let Garrett Wilson beat them. And he's already playing banged up with a banged up elbow, and he's playing with a quarterback who's not particularly any good. So it was just a rough outing all in all for Garrett Wilson there. Tyler Lockett, had a down day as well. He came into the week dealing with a hamstring injury, so don't know if that hamstrung him at all. But anyway, Tyler Lockett, just not a great day there for him. Chris Godwin, not a fantastic day by him either. Jalen Waddle, it's just been a rough year for him, man. You hope that he could turn it around at some point, but it's really just been rough. And then Jamar Chase, caught a touchdown, had I think it was like 7 targets or something like that in the game, but still did not have a good fantasy day. And then on top of that, lost Joe Burrow for the rest of the season. So what does that do for the Bengals pieces, the Bengals offense? I mean, T. Higgins will come back, I'm sure, but I think it caps the upside here for the Bengals, passing game. Obviously, Jake Browning looked halfway decent, on Thursday night, but that's not something that, you think is going to be generally pretty repeatable here for the rest of the season there. So, I think Chase is the piece that I would continue to want. T. Higgins seems like it would be rough to count on him anything more than like a wide receiver 3. He's had like the unluckiest fantasy season that I could remember in quite some time there. So that's been unfortunate. And then I can't think of anybody else that might have been a Jag. Do see we have some questions. We will get to those in a minute once we wrap up these tight end swags here, or just the tight end position in general, right before waivers. Starting with our tight end swag, the number 1 tight end on the week, George Kittle. Obviously, thus far, Travis Kelce hasn't played, but phenomenal day by George Kittle. It was a great matchup against Tampa Bay. 8 receptions on 9 targets, 89 receiving yards, and a touchdown there. 22.9 PPR points on the day. So just a great day by George Kittle. And again, what was a great matchup here for him. The number 2 tight end on the day, Josh Oliver, 4 targets, 4 receptions, 47 receiving yards, and a touchdown there. Basically just the day that we all thought that TJ Hawkinson would have. I mean, actually, honestly, if you take his targets, add them to his stats, add them to TJ Hawkinson's, and I think that's the day everyone thought TJ Hawkinson was going to have. But it's Josh Oliver who finishes as the highest scoring tight end on the Minnesota Vikings this week with a number 2 finish. And the tight end 3 on the week, that was David Njoku. 15 targets from DTR here, 7 receptions, 56 receiving yards, 12.6 PPR points on the day. Gotta love that production and that volume there for David Njoku. Rounding out the tight end swags, we've got tight end 4, Stone Smart. Tight end 5, Dalton Schultz. Tight end 6, Dalton Kincaid. The tight end 7, Luke Schoonmaker. The tight end 8, Donald Parham Jr. The tight end 9, TJ Hawkinson. At 10, we've got my tight end start of the week, Trey McBride. I'm not going to hit the button because we wanted more than 9.3 PPR points. Tight end 11, we had Tanner Hudson tying with Cade Otton here. So not really a great tight end week. We had some guys that like Stone Smart, Luke Schoonmaker, Donald Parham, maybe he was started, but Tanner Hudson, like none of these guys were started. Like, so this is not a great tight end week. I mean, maybe in a real deep league, Tanner Hudson was started because he's been picking up some steam, but or picking up some steam rather, but there's like not a chance that Luke Schoonmaker or Stone Smart were started, like 0%. So again, not a great tight end week when that's, we went from 22 points from George Kittle, or almost 23 points, down to less than 15 to the tight end 2. Now, again, Travis Kelce hasn't played, but, again, just not a great tight end week there. But the tight end touchdown or nah, tight end of the week, definitely love to give that one out because it just goes to show you, like, anybody could finish as a tight end 1 as long as they catch a touchdown, right? So Luke Schoonmaker is our touchdown or not tight end of the week, 2 catches on 2 targets for 23 receiving yards and 1 touchdown reception. Had he not caught that touchdown, he would have finished with 4.3 PPR points, which definitely would not have been good enough to finish as a top 12 tight end. But because he catches a touchdown, he's able to do that there. So shout out to you, Luke Schoonmaker. And perfect segue into our Jags, because Luke Schoonmaker was a Dallas Cowboy tight end that caught a touchdown. That means Jake Ferguson did not. And because Jake Ferguson did not, he finished as like the tight end 20 this week, which just kind of like, I'm not going to use this as a time to like just crap on Jake Ferguson, but it's kind of like my issue with him, right? Is that like, I don't want a touchdown dependent tight end. I want a tight end who's happens to be, a function of their offense. Like, they happen to get targets consistently. If they catch a touchdown, that adds to the ceiling, but they don't need a touchdown to make their day. And obviously some days like that are going to happen. Like, we've seen it from Mark Andrews. We've seen it from Travis Kelce. Like, it's going to happen, right? But Trey McBride, like, I can live with Trey McBride getting 7 targets and then not coming through with a big day because he got 7 targets. Now, we've had games from Jake Ferguson where he's got 7 targets, right? And we also have games where he's gotten 2. And, like, those aren't going to really win you anything. So that's my little rant there for Jake Ferguson. But Evan Ingram also comes in as a Jag. Luke Musgrave, my tight end stream of the week, comes in as a Jag as well. Cole Kmet thought he could have done well with Justin Herbert back. And then Chigo Okonkwo, Greg's tight end stream of the week, also not coming through with a big day. But it's been rough for him all season. It seemed like, and that is all we got on the tight end position. Let's go to some questions, and then I'll go to injuries, and then waivers. So Chandler Constantino asked, trade Tyreek Hill for ETN and Jamar Chase, PPR league. I'm not doing this deal. If you asked me this last week, I would have said yes. If you asked me last week, I would have 100% said yes to this, but not this week. Tyreek Hill is, again, we talk about the ceiling that he has. Jamar Chase, I don't think, has that ceiling anymore, unfortunately. With no Joe Burrow, it's not going to be a situation where I'm interested in chasing him down, in trades as a buy low, because, again, I don't see that ceiling being there for him. Now, if you're hurting at running back, I could see why you would want to do this. But Travis ETN is a guy who obviously comes with that, a similar type ceiling there. But Tyreek Hill is a guy that I don't think I would rather have another wide receiver in fantasy right now. The second question on the day is, should I trade Tua and Waddle or Tua and Olave for ETN? So basically 2 questions involving a Miami Dolphins piece to acquire ETN. My other quarterback is Fields, and my other wide receivers are JSN, Tank Dell, Deontay, and Cup. My other running backs are CMC, Pollard, Jalen Warren, Keaton, and Charbonnet. Yeah, I mean, I would, with Justin Fields as your quarterback, Tua's schedule I think is pretty bad down the stretch. If I can find it, they play the Jets, then Washington. Washington's a great matchup, obviously. Then Tennessee, but then they play the Jets, Dallas, and Baltimore. So those aren't not particularly great matchups there to end the season, and obviously playoff week. So I would prefer Justin Fields just because, Justin Fields' down game is like he finishes as the quarterback 9, 10, or 11 because of his legs. But a Justin Fields ceiling game is like beyond what Tua can do because, again, Justin Fields might run for 60, 70, 80, 100 rushing yards, a touchdown or 2, but then throw for 2 or 3 touchdowns as well. And I want that kind of juice in my lineup come playoff time. So I'm 100% behind this trade. I say the Tua Waddle side because you probably will be able to get that done. The Olave side, like you could sell the allure of like, oh, I could stack Tua with Waddle and let the other person deal with that. Tua and Olave, then you're kind of hedging there. I do like that a little bit. You're hedging because if Tua Waddle do blow up, that at least you have the Waddle piece of that. But Olave, is kind of dependent on Jameis Winston being inserted into the lineup there. So, all right, moving on to news and injuries. So in terms of injuries, there's quite a few things that went down. I mean, Green Bay running back Aaron Jones, he left Sunday's game and is questionable for Week 12 with a knee injury. According to Matt LaFleur, he seemed to have avoided a long-term injury there. So, that's at least good news. But in terms of Week 12, they play the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving. I don't think that's going to be something that we can I don't think we can depend on Aaron Jones there. So A.J. Dillon will be the guy. Geno Smith, he's questionable for Week 12, also playing on Thanksgiving with an elbow injury. So they're slated to play the 49ers. I don't foresee him having it's going to be tough. He's a tough guy. He wants to play, came back into the game, but it's going to be tough on the short turnaround for him to be able to play in this game on Thursday. So be prepared to be without him. And I think that would slightly downgrade the Seattle pieces for me there as well. For the Rams, Cooper Kupp, he left Sunday's game and did not return with what looked like an ankle injury. So that is obviously unfortunate. He tried to get back in the game, stayed on the sideline, was trying to get back in. They did not reinsert him into the game. So I'm anticipating he'll probably expect to be without Cooper Kupp at least for Week 12. Deontay Foreman, he left Sunday's game and did not return with an ankle injury. Came into the game dealing with an ankle, had quickly aggravated it, and did not return. Khalil Herbert continued to take on the bulk of the work, but Roschon Johnson was also very involved. Miami running back Devon Achane, he left Sunday's game with a knee injury and did not return. Unfortunately, it was the same knee that he had previously injured earlier in the season. So, that's obviously concerning. I would highly doubt that he would be available for the Miami Dolphins when they take off to face the New York Jets on Black Friday on Amazon Prime. So I would anticipate him not playing there. Seattle running back Kenneth Walker III, he suffered an oblique injury, quickly ruled out of the game. or I think he was doubtful, but never came into the game. So it seems like he'll miss week 12 as well against the 49ers, and Zach Charbonnet will probably make his first start and debut as the lead running back there for Seattle. And then Darius Slayton, wide receiver for the New York Giants, was on his way to a pretty good fantasy day, but was quickly ruled out of the game with an arm injury. So expect the New York Giants offense to, probably be without him for some period of time. And now on to waivers, and Greg is not here, so you're not going to get the in-depth analysis here that Greg might give for waivers, but I'm just going to throw out some names, discuss their upcoming matchups, if need be, or their situation that makes them kind of fantasy relevant, and just give you my quick brief thoughts on that. But at quarterback, again, this is no particular order. I could just tell you if I feel strongly or not about them. But at quarterback, Jordan Love is a guy that stands out as a guy you could, look at for, waiver priority. He plays against Detroit on Thanksgiving. Has been solid, all season. Has at least, 13.8 fantasy points in his last 5 matchups here. And the Detroit Lions have been a team that you can attack through the air offensively, and he's only rostered in 46% of Yahoo leagues at this time, so definitely available. And, is a guy that, again, it's not going to look pretty. It's not going to look pretty, but he will get it done from a fantasy perspective there. Also at the quarterback position, okay. Sorry. I thought Sam Howell was only rostered in 79% of leagues. That would have been pretty crazy. It's not a great week for quarterbacks. I'm going to be honest, guys. Not a particularly great week. So Tommy DeVito's name does come up. I mean, they play New England, so that's not a particularly scary matchup. That's one that's been beatable all year. Tommy DeVito is not afraid to throw it down the field, which I've liked. Has thrown at least one touchdown pass in each of his last 3 games, all starts. And he does run a little bit as well, not afraid to use his legs, especially when they get down to the goal line. So definitely a guy that you could look to if you are in deep trouble. I'm not willing to play Drew Lock against this ramped up Niners defense. Jake Browning, are we looking to play him against Pittsburgh? Not particularly. But if you are, if Russell Wilson is rostered in your league or not available in your league, I mean, he's only rostered in 54% of Yahoo leagues. Plays Cleveland next week. So, again, not a particularly great matchup there. So, it's not a ton of guys. So, I think I'm looking at Jordan Love. Crazy, but I'm looking at Tommy DeVito. If Trevor Lawrence was dropped in your league, maybe you go ahead and take a look at him. We're not going to the Tim Boyle route. We're not going the Aiden O'Connell route. DTR potentially plays Denver. Nope, not going that route either. Playing Denver. So yeah, not a great quarterback week, guys. So hopefully you are able to, you have somebody rostered, or you don't have to go to any of these options because they're not great options at all. Moving on to the running back position, I think, just looking, top guy I would go after would be Zach Charbonnet. He's going to lead the Seahawks run offense. They're obviously dealing with a quarterback situation as well. We don't know how long the Kenneth Walker injury is. So Charbonnet, 44% of Yahoo leagues he's rostered in. So still available in 56% of them. That's a guy that I would immediately prioritize and try to get on my roster just because of the volume is going to be there. Secondly, Ty Chandler. Talked about him, pretty decent amount up to today. Still available in, again, 56% of Yahoo leagues. So he's just only rostered in 44% of leagues. He's a guy had 10 carries, 73 rushing yards. A guy I would prioritize just because he's got juice, he's got ability, and if he is able to if something happens to Alexander Madison, is injured in any way, I mean, he'll get this backfield to himself for some period of time. And I prioritize both of those guys over the next guy I'm going to talk about, and that's A.J. Dillon. A.J. Dillon, first off, doesn't have a great matchup against Detroit next week, but he's not looked good all year. I mean, has not run for more than 76 yards in a game, has only run for more than 60 yards 3 times in a game. And he's had plenty of opportunities. He's got, multiple games of double-digit carries, 14 for 29 last week against the Chargers, which was supposed to be a good matchup. Again, he's available in 48 or 38% of Yahoo leagues. So that's a guy that I would look to, but not expecting a ton of production from him. And then Kyron Williams, if he's available in your league, I know if you didn't have an IR spot, he's supposed to come back this week. So he's a guy that I would look to, as is Khalil Herbert, also available in a ton of leagues, available in 30% of Yahoo leagues, as he's a guy that also just recently came back from the injured reserve. But Roschon Johnson, he looked good on Sunday as well. In the limited opportunities that he had. So he's a guy that I would look to potentially add if possible. Moving on to the wide receiver position. It's not going to be a ton of guys here. Khalil Shakir is probably the name that pops out. Jaden Reed. That's probably going to be the first guy that I would target. Would be Jaden Reed, only rostered in 36% of Yahoo leagues, so he's widely available. His back-to-back weeks of 19 PPR points, has had double-digit PPR points in 4 out of his last 5 games. You could actually keep going. His box score is littered with double-digit PPR points. He's got a matchup against Detroit, Kansas City, the Giants, Tampa Bay, Carolina, Minnesota. So these are all really good matchups down the stretch here for the remainder of the fantasy playoffs here, where Jaden Reed could definitely provide some value there to your fantasy teams. So he's a guy I would definitely prioritize. Again, only rostered in 36% of Yahoo leagues there. Khalil Shakir, only rostered in 11% of Yahoo leagues. He's another guy that you could prioritize. Gets Philadelphia next week. That's a great matchup there. Rondell Moore, only rostered in 15% of Yahoo leagues. Gets the LA Rams next week, so could be useful in that matchup, and has shown to be more of a downfield presence this year, not attached to Cliff Kingsbury, but rather with Kyler Murray and this new offense here for the Arizona Cardinals. Elijah Moore gets a matchup against Denver, so not particularly great, but has had 7+ targets in back-to-back, or 7 targets in back-to-back weeks. Has had at least 60 yards and a touchdown, or a touchdown in back-to-back weeks. So definitely a guy that I think you could look to if you need help at the wide receiver position. And now moving on to the tight end position. Again, not expecting it to be a week where we can look to some guys, but Donald Parham Jr. kind of sticks out because we did see that Gerald Everett was out with a chest injury, so he was able to start at tight end and play and get 6 targets here for 57 yards, and this is the second time where he's had at least 4 receptions for 40 yards in 2 games without Gerald Everett there. So he's been operating as the true number 1 tight end in these situations. So definitely a guy I think you could look to if you need some help at the position. Cade Otton still available in 80% of Yahoo leagues. Gets Indianapolis next week, which is a pretty good matchup there for him. So like that. And then Isaiah Likely expected to have a role here with Mark Andrews expected to be out for at least the remainder of the regular season. I would imagine he's available in 96% of Yahoo leagues. So he's a guy I would also look to if I needed help at the tight end position. Well, that is all I have, folks. Again, remember, tomorrow we are here 10 a.m. or not tomorrow. Wednesday we're here 10 a.m. to do our Spodioti Dopa show. We are breaking down every single aspect of fantasy football, all the games for the weekend, and you will not hear from us again until Monday. But until next time, y'all, we will catch y'all later. That'll be Wednesday right here, 10 a.m. And make sure you stop by. It'll be a fun time. We'll be here for 2 hours, 2+. But it'll be a good time, y'all. Until next time, y'all, have a good one. Good luck tonight, and we're out of here. Peace.